will reconvene this January 22nd meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. Welcome back to the board meeting, everyone. We are fully assembled as a board, and we have an agenda in front of us. I'll move directly into the meeting, barring any necessary objections by the board. Seeing none, I'll move right into our 1:30 time certain, which is this is not a time certain, but it's at 1:30. There's a first reading and public setting of the second reading and public hearing on ordinance 22-02 in the matter of amending Lane Code chapters 2, 5, 6, and 9 to modernize and update general organization functions, procedures, and processes, adopting a severability clause with associated citations. And Mr. Mokraisi, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Chair. I think Lindsay Eichner has this item, so go ahead, Lindsay.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Today, we're here, or I'm here representing our team that we've been working on this project, asking for a motion to approve the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing on ordinance 2022 for January 25th, 2022 at 1:30 p.m.
Thank you, Lindsay. Is that the extent of the staff presentation?
If today, yes, we will have much more to share on the 25th, but I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any today.
Thank you, Ms. Eichner. To entertaining a motion, any discussion from the board? I see none, then I'm ready for a motion. And Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'll move and then I can make it a discussion to the motion. I'll move that we have conclude this first reading, set a second reading and public hearing on ordinance 22-02 in the matter of amending Lane Code chapters 2, 5, 6, and 9 to modernize and update general organization function, procedures, processes, and adopting a severability clause, with a reading and public hearing, second reading and public hearing, January 25, 1:30 time certain.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second. Sure.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger, seconded by Commissioner Bozevich. First reading and setting a second reading of and public hearing of ordinance 22-02, etc. Is there any discussion to the motion? Commissioner Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Just a procedural question. This is still part of my learning curve. This morning, we moved adoption or second reading and public hearing for a time certain on January 25th for another item. So I just didn't know if we need to make any adjustments to this motion so as not to be in conflict with ourselves from the morning session.
Ms. Jones, can you clarify that? Yeah, thank you.
I can clarify that. We set all public hearings at 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon, and they just stack and they start at 1:30 and follow.
Great. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any further discussion to the motion? I see none. Then I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Excuse me, Chair. Commissioner Bozevich wants to be in the queue.
And I'm sorry, Commissioner Bozevich, I'm having to scroll back and forth at the bottom of my screen right now. I don't have a gallery view. Commissioner Bozevich.
Thank you. I probably should have brought this up prior to the motion, but I just want to ask Lindsay and maybe if there's some way of the title to the actual ordinance doesn't really lead people to understand what we're doing. You know, if you read the board materials, we're talking about changing our enforcement procedures for various violations. And I don't think the general public reading this is going to appreciate what we're holding the public hearing on. Is there some way of making sure that we make the public understand that we're talking about changing our process, you know, for moving people further down the violations and to the point of actually looking at, you know, quicker ways of going after property and all that for what are currently civil violations now. And not that I disagree with making these changes, but I'm just concerned that the title doesn't match what we're doing. And I want the public to be understanding of what we're planning on doing in a way that makes sure that we get adequate public comment on those changes. Believe me, I've been frustrated with this process. You know, you and many other people in L&D are aware of, and I'm sure that Commissioner Buck, being a rural commissioner, gets this also, of some of these problem properties that we can fine and fine and fine, and the people just ignore the fines, and we put liens on property, they ignore the liens. And I know one property where the people were living illegally on it post foreclosure by the bank. And we still couldn't do anything about the fact that they were polluting and violating all sorts of county codes. So I understand the motivation behind it, but I don't think the title quite matches or makes the public aware of what the board's doing. Is there something we can do in between now and the 25th to make sure the public understands?
Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich. I'm not sure if you have a good answer for that, Ms. Eichner, but please.
Thank you for that comment, and I agree that the title is fairly vague, and I think that's because it's covering so many chapters. I will do my best before the next time that we come before you to see if we can get this changed. Maybe in our reports, we can have a little bit more thorough proposal section or agenda item summary, maybe add a little bit more in there, but I'll work with County Council to see if we can amend the title of the ordinance. I do believe if we do that it may require a third reading. So that's consideration for the board if we want to do that. But I'm happy to look into that.
Thank you, Ms. Commissioner Bozievich. You still have the floor.
Yeah. So with that understanding, do you have a simple sentence we could add today as part of the first reading, so we don't have to go through a third reading, that would better disclose what we're amending in those 4 chapters of the code? I'm trying to think of a simple phrase that sums up that multi-page staff report.
Chair Farr and Commissioner Bozievich, if I can interrupt, Andy Clark from the County Council Office.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Good interruption.
I'm reluctant to advise changing the title of the ordinance at this point, unless what the board wants to do is essentially reset another first reading and let this ordinance expire. Technically, we're supposed to maintain the name of the ordinance unchanged through the readings. The substance of what's in the ordinance can change, of course, and that's usually what we talk about when we're discussing whether we want to add third or fourth readings, that sort of thing. But the title usually remains the same. My suggestion really would be to add perhaps some descriptive language that follows the ordinance in the agenda listing, for example, and also, of course, in the notifications that go out or the agenda memo that LMD will produce.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Commissioner Bozievich.
I believe that sounds like a great solution, that maybe we can just add something that's more descriptive in the agenda that gets printed for the 25th. I was just concerned that we're actually taking on a pretty big item in changing processes that could ultimately result in the forfeiture of somebody's property, which is a really heady thing if you think about that in itself. Our current process, though, is just not effective at all in enforcement. So I know we have to go that direction, but I do believe the public should understand what we're doing ultimately is setting up a process that could end with somebody having to forfeit their property to the county. And that is not clear in the title of the ordinance at all. So that's just all. I think if it was clear, that will generate a certain amount of public comment, or at least people that review it accept it and we'll maybe provide public comment and support, but I don't want to have it kind of be an under the radar thing we do. And then a year later, we have people coming in and talking about how the county unfairly changed the process to penalize them and shorten due process or something like that, that people didn't understand what we're doing. I think Andy's suggestion works well. I was just concerned to make sure that the public really understands what we're doing.
Thanks, Commissioner Bozievich and Mr. Clark. And without objection from the board, then Lindsay, is it okay to impose that task upon you to add a clause or a sentence to the after the ordinance title?
I would be more than happy to help do that.
And that satisfies your questions, Commissioner Bozievich? Right on. Any further questions? Any further discussion toward the motion? I see none. Then I will call for the vote.
Commissioner.
Commissioner Burney, thank you.
No, thank you. I'm sorry. I understand. So my understanding is, Commissioner Bozievich, that you don't want to do this for inciting public comment. It's just a matter of full transparency, right? And I'm presuming, Mr. Clark and Ms. Eichner, that whether in bold or by whatever means in our public hearing, you will in fact do that, because we need to know what we're voting on too. Thank you, Chair.
That's a strange requirement, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Very good. Then Ms. Eichner, is everything clear to you then?
Yes, what I understand is that I will work with Diana to add some additional language into the agenda.
Perfect, well stated. Then without further discussion to the motion, I see none. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion, which is approving the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing of ordinance 22-02, excuse me. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Eichner.
Thank you.
And the rest of the panel, should anybody else be in attendance? There's a list of names. I don't think anybody else is actually here though. Then we'll move along to item 12B on our agenda, which is a report on the 2021 Lane County Planning Commission Annual Report. And today we have Mr. Mokreski. I'll let you introduce the panel today. Thank you.
Yeah, and we have Rachel Sears-Love, our senior planner from land management, who's here to introduce the group. Give you an overview. Rachel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Farr and commissioners. This is Rachel Sears-Love, senior planner. And joining me today as well is Planning Commissioner Stephen Dignam, who's chair of the Lane County Planning Commission for 2021. And today we're before you to present the 2021 Planning Commission Annual Report. The Lane County Planning Commission serves as a volunteer advisory committee who's appointed by the board to advise the board on land use matters. And in addition, the commission functions as a citizen involvement advisory committee for Lane County pursuant to ORS Chapter 197 in all aspects of comprehensive planning. And pursuant to the Planning Commission bylaws, a report must be provided to the board on an annual basis, documenting specific activities of the Planning Commission over the previous year. And that's the purpose of staff being before you today. And in summary of the report, I'll give a brief overview of the composition and attendance of the Planning Commission. And then Chair Dignam will provide a summary of the 2021 accomplishments. In 2021, all 9 seats of the Planning Commission were filled for most of the year. The Planning Commission met 11 times over the year, and there was strong attendance by our planning commissioners. And I'll just give a summary of some of the vacancies that were before you. There were 2 vacancies that became available in October of 2020 with the end of Commissioner Thorpe's and Commissioner Weeks's terms. And those vacancies were filled with 2 new appointments. Kathy Smith was appointed on January 5th, and Christian Bittal was appointed February 2nd, 2021 for their first terms. Then in October of 2021, 4 vacancies became available with the ending of Commissioner Kuhn, Ledick, Rose, and Lemler's terms. And those vacancies were filled by Bruce Hadley, Eliza Kaczynski, Johnny Peacock, and Stephen Snyder. who were appointed on August 31st, 2021 for their first terms and served at their first Planning Commission meeting on October 19th, 2021. And I would, on behalf of Lane County staff, I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity to present the report to you today, and also to thank our Planning Commission members for their technical expertise and their public service and their dedication. And now I'll turn it over to Chair Dignam to discuss some of the Planning Commission's 2021 accomplishments. Thank you.
Love, and welcome, Chair Dignam.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel, and thank you, commissioners. First thing I want to do, Rachel touched on it, but we had 6 people leave the Lane County Planning Commission over the last year. Randy Ladek, Barry Rose, Dwight Kuhn, Wayne Lemler, Larry Thorpe, Robert Weeks. I just want to take the time to acknowledge the contributions that they made to land use planning in Lane County. They'll be sorely missed. We have some new folks that are showing tremendous potential to fill those shoes of those that are leaving. The other thing I really want to call attention to, citizen involvement. We had a grand total of 1 person provide testimony at a planning commission meeting over the last year. There's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, what we did was important, but it just didn't seem to really grasp the intention of the public. So there wasn't a huge draw to our meetings. On top of that, I think the whole virtual environment perhaps isn't quite as interesting and enticing to some members of the public. So I look forward to the time when we get back to when we can have perhaps some kind of a hybrid meeting where people can still participate via Zoom, but can also come in person. I want to state we're off to a much more active start in 2022 as far as public citizen involvement. We had a hearing regarding the Springfield land use planning amendments a week or so ago, and we had 16 people in attendance on Zoom, of which 9 spoke. So I'm feeling much better about the potential for greater citizen involvement during 2022. We did have some very good accomplishments. I don't think I'm going to read them all, since I believe you probably have this material in front of you. We worked on the Cresswell land use plan amendments. We did some continued work on the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan. We did some very important work on updating our floodplain regulations. And last but not least, we really had an opportunity. I really want to thank staff for this. We had 3 excellent training sessions. I think that's the most in a year since I've been involved on the Planning Commission. And there were some general training on the planning process, in particular focused on that number of new folks that we have. But we also had some in-depth work on wildfire science. That was something that I think is going to become even more critical in the coming years. So I want to thank the staff for all of the wonderful support that they gave us last year. And that concludes my report on Planning Commission.
Thank you, Chair Dignam. And Ms. Serslev, anything you would like to add at this point?
Nothing else to add. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for the report. A relatively short report for the incredible amount of intense and productive work that both Citizen Involvement Committee and Planning Commission work on. You know, for the 10 years I was on the Eugene City Council, the first 2 years we had a separate Citizen Involvement Committee, and then it became evident that through Oregon statute that the Planning Commission actually serves as the Citizen Involvement Committee for most governmental bodies, and that's the position that we're at right now. The Planning Commission, Ms. Serslev, is statutory, correct?
Yes, it is.
We are required by We're required by Oregon state law to have the Planning Commission / Citizen Involvement Committee, and the citizen members of the Planning Commission satisfy, without any further input, they satisfy the nature of the statute, or satisfy the letter of the statute. But beyond that, the Planning Commission and the Citizen Involvement Committee is intended to give real-time, insightful information and recommendations to the board, which it is appointed by, in this case, appointed by the Board of County Commissioners. And the Planning Commission, for its work to be effective and for it to be meaningful to the Planning Commission, we need to take its work seriously. And that is something that we need to focus on this year, is as the Planning Commission meets, that we do know what their work is, we do know what they're doing, and when they talk, we listen. So anything further on this agenda item? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I want to quickly appreciate all the volunteer hours that go into this committee by its members. Not all committees are equal. This one surely requires an extensive amount of reading and studying time in advance in preparation of your meetings. And I know that you all could be doing a lot of other things with your personal time, and sincerely want to say thank you and appreciate all that you're doing and all the effort you're putting into this committee.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Commissioner Burney. Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Burney.
Well, here, I know this one's right. Thank you, Chair Dignam. Seriously, I'd like to echo Commissioner Buck's remarks. Take heart in that it sounds like there might be more citizen engagement in 2022 based upon what you said. Delighted that that related to Springfield, and cannot conceive the hours you're putting in, and just thank you for staying on and the stability and leadership you provide this group. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Further discussion? I see no further discussion, and we have no motion other than, I guess, a head nod approval of the report. Ms. Surslov, do you need any further action beyond that?
Nope, I don't need a motion.
Very good. And Chair Dignam, thank you very much, and pass it along to the balance of the Planning Commission. Your work is often unheralded, often underappreciated, and occasionally ignored. I apologize for that. Thank you very much. We'll move along then to item C, which is the monthly holiday farm fire update. And today, Mr. Mokryski, I'll once again ask you to introduce the panel.
And Matt McRae is with us here to lead this item. Matt, go ahead.
Thanks very kindly. Can you all hear me okay? Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Farr and Commissioners. Matt McRae with Emergency Management here at Lane County. I am going to provide a brief overview. Last time I was here at the end of December, I provided an annual overview of recovery efforts to date with some forward-looking projections of what's coming up. My intent today is to spend just a little bit of time to highlight those items that are on the work plan over the coming months and spend a little more time there. I also want to acknowledge that at the end of our last update, at the time, Chair Burney suggested that we provide some thank you letters to a number of our recovery partners. And I want to let you know that those are in the works. We should have those out within the next couple of weeks. And I appreciate that suggestion, Commissioner Burney. I do have a short presentation here just to share as we go. And I'm realizing I just blocked out my view. So I'm sorry, I'm going to start that presentation and then share my screen with any luck. Am I able to share my screen, Diana? I'm not seeing that option.
Yes, you are, but I will just go ahead and run it for you. I have it up.
Oh, I see it. There it is.
So you're going to run it?
Yeah, thank you so much. Great. Is that screen showing holiday farm fire recovery update? Hopefully.
Yes, it is.
Great. Thanks so much. So I'm just going to start, as I have in the past, with a reminder of the current status of sheltered individuals. We, again, this month in January, as of yesterday, still have 135 displaced survivors who are sheltering in hotels in Eugene and Springfield. This is always hard for me to look at the numbers, but I'm also reminded that thank goodness the state is leaning in here to provide this sheltering so folks aren't winding up in a worse situation. And there is a lot of focus on trying to develop opportunities and options for those folks to get into permanent housing. That is a huge thrust of the work being done by Homes for Good. We talked about that some during that update in December. So again, just focusing on some of the things that are coming up. There are funding requests that are due at the end of this month for federal hazard mitigation funds. And one of the first ones here is a significant request for funding from the Mackenzie River Community School that will make building enhancements, including seismic upgrades. Mackenzie Fire and Rescue is leading the charge on a Firewise landscaping proposal. I know that crew is queued up in your agenda for later today, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over that, but that is a really significant and on the ground investment that can reduce fire risk in homes up the Mackenzie Valley. Lane County Emergency Management is taking the lead on a Firewise communications grant application that would hire a marketing firm to help get the word out about the importance of developing defensible space in our rural areas, our rural fire affected areas. And lastly, Eugene Water and Electric Board is leading the charge on some watershed restoration grant proposals. And then I wanted to just touch in a little more depth on some projects that are in the works. So you're all familiar with Oregon Solutions. We had speakers from Oregon Solutions come a couple months ago and share some more detail. Where we are in process right now is there's been a significant amount of work to understand the current situation and some of the needs in the fire affected area. And the project group is really, over the next couple of weeks, going to be honing in on where to focus the effort of the Oregon Solutions program. So I'm hopeful that in the next time that I provide an update, I can give you a little more detail about exactly where Oregon Solutions will be focusing. I will say that the work so far has been really valuable from my perspective in mapping the recovery situation in the Mackenzie. So even just to date, that effort has been valuable. I want to dive in a little bit more detail with the Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association project. I really have to hand it to, there's a crew of volunteers that are associated with the OAPA, and they have we just signed a letter of agreement to involve their help in helping us as a county and as recovery partners better understand the needs and concerns and issues that are present for especially lower income renters and other wildfire survivors that are less commonly heard from. And the goal here is to get a better understanding and then to be able to provide that information to any planning efforts. So whether it's Lane County working on a recovery plan, or long-term recovery group, which is working on a needs assessment, providing the voice, to the extent where possible, putting forward some of the voice from, again, lower income families, renters, and those that are less likely to be heard from as we're having discussions about recovery. They're going to do that by interviewing some of our disaster case managers, and then also combing through the data sets that we have from the conversations that our disaster case managers have had with those survivors so far. I'm really looking forward to seeing the results, and I'll share those with you as soon as they're available. Next, there's a needs assessment that is queuing up this month. So again, the long-term recovery group is a nonprofit that stood up just in the last 6 months, and they're leading the charge on this needs assessment. The effort here is to survey as broadly as we can the full population of wildfire survivors to understand their current situation and the breadth of their needs as a group, so that as we go forward in recovery, we're making sure that we're focusing resources in the right places to meet those needs. I got to tip my hat to the group in the Mackenzie Valley Long-Term Recovery Group who are doing the lion's share of the lifting here to make that happen. 2 more projects in the works. in the emergency management office, we're working on drafting a long-term recovery plan that should be completed by this quarter in order to provide that and share that with community members for their feedback. So this is really just focusing on the recovery priorities for the county specifically. And similarly, we're working on a wildfire recovery lessons learned project. So deeply embedded into emergency management is the concept of doing after action reports, or sometimes referred to as hot washes, where we'll take a look, we'll step back after something's done and take a look and really mine the our efforts to understand how we can do better next time. And that's really the goal here, is to understand what we did well and build on that, and also understand in the next recovery effort that we have, or even in this one, are there ways that we can shift what we're doing to be more effective? And I want to acknowledge that Dan Hurley has really taken the lead in this thus far, doing interviews one-on-one with several county staff to get that lessons learned cataloged. And then I want to highlight a couple of programs that are starting right now. And we've mentioned these in the past, but I'm excited that they're moving forward. So there's a wildfire resilience and recovery account that's been put in place. It's a state funding, and with leadership from Danielle Bautista and Laurel O'Rourke, we have this program that covers a number of one-time and ancillary expenses that are otherwise hard to get funded. So things like credit checks, things like first and last rent or pet deposits, things like that that aren't easy to cover. This program will cover that, and Laurel O'Rourke is taking the lead and piloting that program starting now, which is really exciting because there is a lot of need in the recovery population. And lastly, I mentioned that we had applied for EPA technical assistance with wastewater treatment design, and that has been approved. And so the project is going forward to EPA is hiring a consultant with expertise in wastewater treatment design who can really look closely at the opportunities available for wastewater treatment in Blue River. I want to acknowledge the efforts of the Willamette Partnership, who really did the lion's share of lifting on that grant application. And lastly, I want to ask you all your thoughts about the frequency of these wildfire recovery updates. We've currently been doing this once per month. And so question for you, is that suiting your needs? Would more frequency or reduced frequency be a better fit? A few items to consider here. From my perspective, in working in recovery, the efforts become somewhat less dynamic. It doesn't mean there's not a lot going on. There are a lot of efforts in place, but things are not shifting and changing as quickly. So from my perspective, it may not be as rich for you as a group with your valuable time, just because there aren't as many changes happening. I do want to acknowledge that there are significant recovery funds that are becoming available soon. So that may be something that you want to keep tabs on as that happens. So I also want to acknowledge that we have a couple of new positions that will be hired in the first quarter if everything goes well. Those positions are approved and we should have those positions in place. And so that may be something that you are interested in. And lastly, if we decided to shift the frequency of regular updates, of course, those could be accompanied by board presentations if there are major changes or policy questions arise. That's a question for you all. That's the end of my presentation. I'll hand it over to you, Chair Farr.
Well, thank you, Mr. McRae. Good presentation. And once again, it's less dynamic than it has been, but if you drive up there, you realize that things are moving and changing continually. I have a question for you, and then I'll throw this toward you, Mr. McCraskey, regarding that last question by McRae, the frequency of these meetings. We can take that up in a separate discussion. By nature, here in Lane County, commissioners are elected by district, and we're not elected county-wide. Commissioner Buck, the fire occurred entirely inside of your district. So it affects you and the constituents who have elected you more than anyone else in Lane County. So quite often I do defer to Commissioner Buck regarding the specifics is what are needed up there, because I do believe that Commissioner Buck spends more time inside the fire zone than I do. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Board of County Commissioners right now for questions toward you, Mr. McCray, or toward the administration. And then we'll work on frequency of these presentations subsequently to this. So initially, discussion to Mr. McCray's presentation. And I'll begin with Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I'll too, we'll start with the initial presentation. We can get to the question afterwards. You had mentioned that you were doing the wildfire after action assessment, and you know, to learn better about what we could do in the future. I'm loath to think about going through this again in the future. I really hope that doesn't happen, but inevitably there'll be another fire or a flood or emergency that we'll have to respond to. In that assessment, those interviews, are you doing that just internally, interviews with internal county staff, or are we extending those interviews to the residents of the area?
Good question. So far, the interviews have been internal with staff. Our plan is to extend it out to recovery partners, partners like eWeb, United Way, others that are supporting recovery. I'm certainly open to your ideas in terms of engaging the population more broadly. I can provide you, Commissioner, with the list of entities that we're looking to approach and have a conversation with, so that you can provide suggestions.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCray. Commissioner Buck, you still have the floor.
I don't have any other specific questions to the presentation. As you mentioned, I'm really involved with the entire recovery process, and I'm sure it's more so than the rest of the commissioners on the board. So when the presentations come, I'm generally aware of all the things that are on the list and the slides in advance. To that end, I'll touch on the question that Mr. McRae mentioned about how often this should be presented to the board. Clearly, it makes sense for the board to be presented with new material or policy changes or advocacy on behalf of residents that require the whole board. And I, of course, talk about it with people so often that I'm not in the same position as some of the other board members where you may just hear about this once a month or however often we have a meeting here. I'll just say the residents there, one of their greatest fear is that we're going to forget this happened and we won't be focusing on their needs and recovery, which are still quite deep and quite wide. And so I'm happy to hear it and be involved as often as possible because it is in my district. For you as the rest of the board and commissioners for the rest of the board, although we are elected by district, once we're commissioners, we're the Board of Commissioners for the entire county. So I'm hoping that you all will want to stay involved, and how often you want to do that as a presentation on our board, I'll honor that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck and Ms. McRae. Moving along with further discussion from the board, I'm looking for little yellow hands up in the top left-hand corner, and I see none.
Wait,
I see one. Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. I think thank you for the presentation as always, and I appreciate that bar graph of how many folks are still sheltering in hotels. I literally feel your pain with you on that. And that makes me think about, I think I can't remember if we've had a discussion offline or here at the board about generating some sort of dashboard, like what are the themes that come up often enough that could be presented in a packet. So to me, the frequency, I really appreciate Commissioner Buck's perspective and hearing that from residents about the need to make sure that we are attending to and aware of what this is like for them. And so I'm not opposed to continuing monthly updates and having them be briefer than they were earlier on, but I also really want to make sure our staff resource is being used to actually keep the work moving forward and serve the folks in the district. And so I recognize that there's preparation that goes into this and staff is on the call. So, I would be, if Mr. McCray and Commissioner Buck felt it was frequent enough to make clear our commitment to the recovery and survivors' needs to go to an every other month, knowing you can always flag for us if there is something more time sensitive that can't wait to the next scheduled update. And I would also encourage us not to get locked into that it has to be monthly or quarterly or every other month. It's really just that we plot it on a calendar at some frequency in advance so we can manage our time and the other agenda items. So maybe it's every 6 weeks, maybe it's, something like that. I just don't know that this is the kind of thing that has a hard and fast answer. Maybe we take it a quarter at a time. We wait 2 months this time and see how that feels. I'm really open to kind of experimenting with it and working with it, and look to Mr. McCray and other staff and Commissioner Buck's lead on the right frequency. I will also add, I remember Mr. McCray, you mentioning bringing in guests from partners from some of our work upriver. And so if there are other presentations that are a little more sort of big picture and help us understand some of the partnerships, those were really of a lot of interest to me as well. So if there are more of those in the offing, I'd love to get those scheduled.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I currently have Commissioner Bozovich and then Commissioner Burney in the queue. But Ms. Jones, you raised your hand and lowered it. Was that just a test of the hand raise function?
Was that to me, Chair Park?
Yes. Your hand went up and then went down again.
That was an error if my hand went up. Yes.
Thank you. Then Commissioner Bozovich, followed by Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't really have a lot of opinion on the frequency that's appropriate. It's a tough call. And I know that the fire victims don't want us to feel like we're forgetting them, but I do, understand that maybe once a month at this point might be not enough change between. But I do have a couple, you asked what information would be useful to the board in the coming months. One thing that would be interesting to me might be an update on what's happening with the Willamette National Forest hazard tree and salvage recovery and the lawsuit that stopped that, and whether that's been dealt with, whether they're going to be able to move ahead. That's a considerable concern for a lot of people. And, I know this greatly impacted East Lane, but the resource needs for recovery have greatly impacted all rural residents in Lane County and what it did in the building department for quite a while. And people that could not get building permits and were being told that we were prioritizing fire permits. So, this is a large issue permit-wise. And with that, I'd like to understand, and this is somewhat to benchmark ourselves and judge, where are all the other counties with issuing permits for fire-destroyed dwellings? I kind of know where Marion and Douglas sit only because I speak with those commissioners fairly frequently, but I have no idea where how Clackamas is doing and where we sit relative to those, because it's sort of, we're operating somewhat in an informational vacuum of only seeing our progress and not, how's everybody else doing? Are we way behind? Are we ahead? And just kind of understanding a little bit more about, how we fit in that, and I think that's also maybe a lessons learned issue is, if we are ahead, well, how we get ahead. If we're behind, why are we behind? Is a really important issue to understand. But when we're only looking at our own data, we're really not judging ourselves maybe as against, you know, the performance of other recovery efforts. And that Labor Day fires was not just Wayne County, it was multiple counties. So those are my two informational requests. And, you know, it might have to be legal counsel you ask for questions about and some other people on the Willamette Forest question. Getting data from other counties may not be an easy thing to do either. So I don't know how much cooperation there'll be there, but it seems like that should be two data points I'm interested in.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you very much, Chair. When I raised my hand, I did not intend to completely follow up on Commissioner Vocevich's points, but I think they make sense and I'd like to add to them. First, it may be, I don't know, but it may be that the Association of Oregon Counties might provide some of that comparison. And it might not be a comparison to see who's doing good or bad. It's just a comparison. So I think there are some areas where all wildfire recovery counties have in common. People that are still needing shelter, various amounts of dollars for specific programs. I mean, I know based on staff input that we've secured over $22 million for partners upriver for various recovery efforts. So I think it would be fascinating to compare that and see where the similarities and differences are. Having said that, I'd like to move on to another. But the other thing is, I think that an Excel spreadsheet might save a good amount of time that's comparing the same thing over time. And forgive me, Mr. McCray, I don't mean this as a criticism, I'm just generally speaking. I think the information here is kind of soft other than the survivors sheltering in hotels. And it would be good to look at a little more hard data if it could, I don't know, if it could be organized. Another thing you discussed, a lot of people in government sitting and talking in hindsight over how we can do better next time, and we're not through this time. I understand reflection is always a part of action, and it leads to a cycle of continuous project improvement. However, you know who you didn't mention? You didn't mention fire victims. You didn't mention people that I know Commissioner Buck is very close to, but nonetheless, if you're going to develop a report for how to improve processes, my opinion is you have to talk to the ultimate user and beneficiary of that response, not just the people in agencies that are facilitating the response. Just my opinion. And I guess that's it, Chair. Thank you very much. No, that's it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Commissioner.
I'm sorry. There was one more thing. I apologize. You know, we each are elected and represent some of the unique needs of our districts in the county, but our job is the county. Our entire job is the entire county. And we lean on the expertise and the position of different of us. And obviously, in terms of this subject, Commissioner Buck has done more heavy lifting by definition. but I really feel that when you talk about fire victims and the communities don't want to be forgotten, that's really true. We can't forget them just because I live in Springfield. And by the way, that's impacted Springfield, right, significantly in terms of some of the hotels that survivors are staying in, some of the impacts, because this is the way downriver. And as someone who survived a 7-point-some earthquake, the Beta Breakers earthquake in 1989, and had massive damage and a whole part of my house fall down with a brick fireplace, you are forgotten. You do feel like you're forgotten after the headlines are over. So I think it's imperative to figure out a way to minimize our time, but maximize our involvement and knowledge. And I would leave that to you, Mr. McCray. Thank you, Chair. I won't interrupt anything.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney, and thank you, Matt, for that response. And you know, just back to who has greater interest in any particular item in the county. Of course, we all have interest in everything in the county. Soon, Fern Ridge Dam will be in my district. So soon, anything that happens on, not the lake, but the dam will be in my district. And soon the fire station in Franklin will be in my district, but North Eugene High School will not. So things change a little bit. We are responsible for all of Lane County in our decision making. Ms. McCray, bearing that in mind, I was in my office the other day, and my question is surrounding who has any input or jurisdiction regarding the contractors who are operating in the fire zone in the area. And I just happened to be in my office. I was the only county commissioner in that day. So this lady needed to speak to someone. I happened to be there. And she was talking about specifically about flagging crews discarding their lunch waste into the water, which when the rains came recently caused a plug in the culvert, which she had to go in and plug. Commissioner Burney, excuse me, you may have heard about this, but I talked to her name was Darla. She lived, I believe, at milepost 36. But she said that she went and directly asked the folks to not throw the garbage in the waste in the water stream, and they said, "You're impeding my work." And in her anecdotal language, they told her to go away. So my question, Ms. McCray, and maybe it's more for Mr. Mokrahajski, if contractors are, now I'm not saying this is from anecdote only, I did not personally observe this, but if contractors are acting badly, working for Lane County, how do we or how do citizens have input on correcting that behavior?
That's a fair question. Mr. Mokrahajski, I would defer to you if you have thoughts on that. And Commissioner or Chair Farr, I'm happy to take a closer look at what tools we have available. But I'd be interested in Mr. Mokrahajski's thoughts there.
Yeah, Chair.
And with such an impromptu question, I don't expect much of an answer. Please go ahead, Steve.
No, that's fine. I see Commissioner Buck raised her hand, so she may have something to say about that. I think the answer depends on what the relationship, the role, regulatory role that the county has in a given situation. Mm-hmm. We certainly have the ability to provide influence. The question is whether or not we have a direct regulatory role. So I think we can talk about that maybe a little bit more offline and think through maybe what your thoughts are and what current strategies that we've deployed. I'm interested to hear what Commissioner Buck has to say as well.
Thanks, Ms. Smoker. And quick response. I don't want to interfere with contractors' work because they have a job to do based upon the contract they've written. But if there is a situation that is causing grief for the people who are adjacent to it, is there a mechanism? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I believe in this case, the contractors were most likely those that were directly hired from ODOT. Mm-hmm. Regardless, though, this can become an issue and has in various aspects of the recovery process up there. And what I have been doing is just working through Patience Winningham, our emergency manager, and trying to contact those that actually have the contract so they can speak to their staff and double check the claims and make sure that everybody's trying to work as respectfully as possible. I believe that in most cases that has been done.
And I believe that to be true. Thank you, Commissioner Buck. That is an appropriate means of response. Thank you so much. Anything else further from Mr. McCray or for this presentation? And I'm skimming down to see if nope. Mr.
McCray, I wanted to see. I'm hearing what I heard from the board is that in terms of frequency of meetings, that monthly is probably becoming too much. Would you support a quarterly update on Holiday Farm Fire, or another sequence?
I'll speak for myself first, Ms. Parker. I say yes, I would, as long as that the caveat that if something should arise, that of course you would report prior to that. But for the rest of the board, in response to Mr. Mokrahajski. Commissioner Burney. Yes, I take that to be yes.
I know I'm mixing it up on you, Chair. I apologize. for what it's worth, I support that too, but I want a monthly report that is, again, on some sort of spreadsheet showing us some of the common denominators that have been discussed.
Thank you. It is apparently universal that a quarterly, Ms. Montgomery, would be adequate. You know, as far as the spreadsheet that Commissioner Bernie's spoken about, and as far as measurement of progress, progress isn't always what we measure. What we measure is change. And as long as we can identify the pillars that we want to measure the change in, then it's relatively easy to gather data and create a graph or whatever kind of a chart you want to monitor change. For instance, how many permits have been issued? For instance, how many trees have been felled? Whatever it may be, whatever we choose to measure, it's relatively easy to measure. The difficult part is choosing things that actually, where the measurement means something to us. And that can be in the form of a dashboard, but the dashboard is best if it can be converted into a change chart, going up or going down, whatever it may be, but at least so you know the difference, so we can monitor how we are doing versus our own past performance. So with that, I see nothing further for this agenda item, Ms. McCray. Thank you very much for your work, for your ongoing work, and I look forward to hearing from you as necessary, and certainly within 3 months.
Thanks, Chair Farr, Commissioners. Good afternoon.
Very good, thanks. Then we'll move along to item 12D on our agenda, which is fire mitigation. And today, Ms. Mokrahisi, I believe we have a panel with us, and I'll turn it over once again for you to introduce. If you'd rather I introduce them, let me know, but in the meantime, I'll ask you to introduce panelists. Thank you.
Sure, and we have Rachel Surslove from Land Management is back, and Patience Winningham Melcher, our emergency manager, are here to walk through a work session on fire mitigation. So we'll turn it over to Rachel and Patience.
Thank you.
Good afternoon again, Commissioners. Rachel Surslove here. And I have a presentation that I'm going to share with you before I get started. Can you all see my screen? Great. So today staff is before you to provide a work session on wildfire mitigation as requested by the board. And today I have presenting with me Patience Winningham, our emergency manager. And we also have Justin Patton from the Oregon Department of Forestry and Chief Darren Busich from McKenzie Fire and Rescue. And they will be helping us present today. And also on the line is Kyle Reed, the Fire Risk Reduction Specialist from the Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office, and Janine Parisi from Eugene Water and Electric Board. And they're on the line to answer any questions that may come up about the wildfire mitigation projects that they're involved in that we're discussing today. Let's see if I can change my slide. There we go. So last August, the board requested a work session on fire mitigation topics. Specifically, you requested information on historic fire data, ignition sources, recent fires and the lessons that we learned from recent fires, and then fire prevention projects that are currently ongoing or planned, and any city engagement efforts that we might have in the works in regards to fire mitigation. And so I'm going to start off, well, I'm not going to start off. I'm going to have Justin Patton from ODF start us off and cover some information on ignition sources and historic fire data. So I'm going to hand it over to him at this point.
All right, good afternoon, Chair Farr and Commissioners. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so before we get started here, I just kind of want to set the context of these statistics to make sure everything's clear. So these fire statistics are only for the South Cascade District of Oregon Department of Forestry. So that is basically the eastern half of Lane County and Lynn County as well. So this excludes, Western Lane. So just kind of setting that framework. It also excludes U.S. Forest Service lands. It does include Bureau of Land Management because Oregon Department of Forestry does have an agreement to protect those lands, but also excludes some of the, the valley fringes where rural fire departments are the protecting agency. So just wanted to set that framework there for you guys for the context, and kind of talk about some of our main leading causes, at least for the South Cascade District, for human caused fire starts. You're always going to have lightning, which we can't really control, those starts. But the human caused fires in our district, the usual leading cause is going to be debris burning. That can be industrial debris burning, things such as, slash burns. Oftentimes those are problematic. We'll get slash burns after fire season in the fall, and then we'll have an event, an east wind event or something, which picks up and leads some of those to lose control. We also have non-industrial debris burning, problems from that. Oftentimes inadequate clearing around piles, landowners not attending their burns, burning under poor conditions, such as, windy conditions. That would be our number one leading cause. That's for, the 3 years that you see here, 2018, 2019, and 2020, but also for the previous 10 years between debris burning and equipment use. Those are generally our top causes. Going down from that, our next leading cause is usually going to be equipment use. Now, this is kind of a broad category. Some of the things that are captured in this, vehicle fires, whether that's, a car wreck causing a fire, car into a power pole, catalytic converters. Are a lot of things that, vehicles can cause fires. There are a lot of ways. Power lines are another one in this category, which can be problematic. Electrical fences, mowing, things of that nature. So those would all be non-industrial. We also have industrial equipment use, things such as logging equipment catching on fire, friction from logging activities, whether it be, cable lines moving, rotary saws, striking rocks, creating sparks, or even blasting occasionally. And those are our big equipment use categories that we see fire causes come from. And then behind that, we kind of, depends on the year, but between recreation and then miscellaneous causes. Recreation, things that we see cause fires, warming fires, campfires left unattended, exploding devices, incendiary, shooting, fireworks. And then when we get to miscellaneous, buildings that are on fire that spread to the wildland, dumping of hot ashes, cooking. This is in recent years has been kind of a problem from I guess what we call non-recreational campers. We've seen a large increase in some of our areas, as well as some of the areas protected by the rural fire departments. And those are really, we have some other categories in here, but those are our main three for the human cause categories. So Rachel, if you want to move on to the next slide. So I just want to kind of give a context of, why what factors need to be present to have large fires. And the main factors that affect how fires burn, topography, steep slopes, narrow canyons that work to funnel winds, weather such as wind, humidity, drought or extended dry spells. And then, the one that we can affect the most, fuel, amount of fuel available, fuel moisture, kind of the continuity, is it continuous, horizontally, vertically? And when we really see the most problematic fires is when we get multiple of these factors that align. And I just want to state that, that makes it critical to have, good initial attack and stop the fires as small as possible, because you see these fires that are on the landscape for longer periods of time, you just have an increased probability that these multiple factors are going to align and you're going to expect, large fire growth. So just kind of wanted to put that context. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. I just put this picture on here to kind of illustrate what we're dealing with currently. As you can see, from 2019 through the latest one that's on here is November. And I just checked the most recent one this morning as of January 4th. We've got a little bit of reprieve with the recent moisture that we have, but still a large majority of Lane County is in a moderate to severe drought. So that's obviously noteworthy. We've had a lot of rain. The problem with getting a lot of rain in a short period of time as a lot of it runs off and is gone. So we really need, a little bit of rain for longer periods of time to allow that moisture to absorb and really see the benefits. So, much as you see this chart slowly progress into drought, it's going to take the opposite to slowly get us out of the drought. And, hopefully that's on the way, but we'll see what we get with the forecast. Go to the next one. I think we'll turn it over to patients for a little bit.
Thank you, Justin. Chair Farr, board, thank you for the time today. I think this was a request from Commissioner Traeger, so I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm going to work with Chief Busich, and we're going to talk about lessons learned from recent fires. So we can go to the next slide, and I'll let Chief Busich take the lead here, and I'll follow up.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Darren Busich, McKenzie Fire Chief, for the record. So a couple of things we talked about pre-meeting was, reliable water source. And for those that don't know, most rural districts like ours do not have any fire hydrants. So we have to rely on the river or canals or creeks or whatever we can to get water from. And this would not have change the impact of the Holiday Farm fire, but on a normal fire. The Lieberg Lake was drained based on the EWEB's requirements to open the roll gates to prevent any potential flooding, knowing the power can be out. So that was a new thing for me. I didn't realize that was even an option to do that. So I learned a lesson learned there, and we've been working around that a little bit. And EWEB has a plan in the future if they have to, they can run off the generator now if they had to. The other thing that we've recognized from this area, and I'll say I've been here 12 years. I came from Southern Oregon for this job as a chief. And in that 12-year period, I like to tell folks that we've maybe burned 30 acres in our fire district, just to give you a little idea that we just do not have a lot of fires. I can't say that anymore. But so I think for that, people got a little bit lax. I think, I came here with a little more energy and made sure all of our equipment was wildland ready, and then we just didn't have the fire. And then when you mention the term firewise, very few folks really know what that means. When you mention the word defensible space, even less know what that means, and fuel breaks. So since the fire, we've done a lot of education, and we have more to go. But I will say that I'm kind of taken back at the lack of interest still. I think it's going to take some boots in the ground, knocking on doors, and some programs to really get people moving forward. But the nature of the fire that led to unavoidable destruction. I think Justin talked about the different climate and stuff, but I will say when this fire first happened, we knew as fire chiefs we were going to have some conditions. It wasn't a secret. The state, your emergency manager, patients, we were all up to date on potential. But what does that mean for us? We can't bring in 1,000 people and just wait. We as fire chiefs organized that we would send crews, whoever had the fire first, if you will, and that happened to be us, our Upper McKenzie's area. We got the response from the folks, but they were not able to get there. And then obviously the whole state was on fire. So I don't know. Reliable water sources for us, again, we're working on adding these tanks. They're not a cheap project. They're difficult to get through a permit process and to move forward. But that's one of our options. They're 15,000 gallon water tanks. But I really want to be able to, I know Commissioner, as you guys have talked about already, not forgetting this fire. Well, I say it every day. We all live through it. It's something I never wanted to experience in my career. It happened. But, really have to push the public, and we have to work on our codes, and we have to work on our standards to I would say raise the bar and let's, make Lane County one that says you want to live here, you're gonna have these fuel break standards around your house, and you're gonna have this type of construction moving forward, and let's make sure we maintain that and not just during initial construction. So I'll stop there. Patience, if you need something else, if you have something else to say, or if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Certainly, I think we may be holding questions till the end. Rachel, is that correct, Commissioner? Yeah. Okay.
That's good.
So a couple of things that I wanted to cover for Holiday Farm Fire. We're really focusing here, particularly on mitigation strategies for the future. And so Chief Busich was talking about fuels reduction and mitigating the fuel load around homes and reducing that risk to communities within fire districts, especially rural fire districts. If we could get the same pocket of homes, 5 to 10 of them, to do a fuels reduction project, we're reducing the risk for wildfire to spread for the 5 to 10 homes in rural settings. They are placed farther apart for a reason, right? That's why we all live in the rural areas. So how do we get those community members to come to the table and have a conversation about reducing the fuel load? There's a couple of projects that I'll talk about here in the future of this presentation of how we're trying to get there and how potentially the group could help. The other thing that I'm working on specifically for mitigation strategies is something about you've heard about this a couple times up until this point, and it's really about outreach and preparedness and mitigation for our community as a whole for Lane County. Now there's federal standards, NFPA and FireWise, that really puts it together and gives us a boilerplate language that we can provide to our community. But we don't have anything that's really specific here locally to Lane County. And Lane County has 3 ecoregions from the coast to the Cascades, and working on how do we put our heads together as a coordinating effort with all of the agencies in the alphabet soup to provide a standard message for Lane County and our citizens of Lane County. And that's everything in all phases of emergency management, from response to mitigation to recovery. And what does that look like? And we're going to be working on a project here in the near future, hopefully. One of the things here for the Holiday Farm Fire specifically that I'm focusing on is emergency alerting, which is a huge topic for us, and a lesson learned in the evacuation process a couple of times. If communications infrastructure fails, how are we alerting the general public? And there are many tools in our box. However, when the power goes out and the lines are cut, what's left? We have emergency alert radio capabilities and distributing those to members of the public. We're currently working through a grant program to help mitigate that risk so that we can alert public that are in the very rural areas that may not get that emergency information from a cell phone or a landline or a TV or a radio because the power's out. But having an emergency alert radio may prepare them a little bit more, including the vulnerable population. So that's something that I'm working to focus our effort on. There was one instance specifically that the board may have heard of from the FireWise group about a home that did participate in the FireWise program and fuels reduction project, I think 6 months or a year before the Holiday Farm Fire, and that home actually survived in the footprint. And so we know that it's proven and it can be done. It's a matter of getting those homeowners to come to the table and have the conversation with us. Rachel, next slide, please. So the Sweet Creek fire was a little bit different. It was one on the other side of Lane County, close to the coast where we get lots of wind. It was near a waterway, included a number of different partners, but impacted very little homes. I think there was less than 150 homes. Justin might have to correct me because it's been a little while now, slept since then, but we utilized a number of partners around the community, and that included private sector, logging companies, and Oregon Department of Forestry's Team 1, and it impacted some of our county roads, and we had to utilize alternative evacuation routes to move the population and then have discussions about when and how could we get those people back into that community. And leveraging those relationships with the utility companies and the capability for emergency alerting. That again is something where there was a huge gap in this area, and we need to be able to get information into the hands of those that need it. This one here also, when we talk about the types of starts, the types of ignition, this was a bad actor, right? So the conditions were right, the weather was right, the indices were low, and we had a guy that just had a bad attitude, right? That started some fires and made it a bad day for the rest of us. Justin, did you have anything you'd like to add to this slide?
Yeah, I'd like to just add a few things. You know, this is in Western Lane, not my district, but I did talk to one of the initial reporting people that lives in Mapleton, works for Oregon Department of Forestry, as well as their protection supervisor. And, you know, kind of as bad as this fire was, it was a little over 300 acres, started on August 30th, just before, you know, a little over a week before the Labor Day fires. This is still considered a success story because if this fire hadn't been caught, and held, you would have been looking at another Holiday Farm fire potential, burning towards Florence and the coast. And, in the immediate area, there was 150 homes roughly, but had it burned clear to the coast, it could have been much worse. And some of the reasons, so like I said, this is kind of considered a success. Some of the reasons they were able to be successful, as patients mentioned, they had some local logging resources that were able to get to the fire within 2 hours, equipment to help construct fire line, and slow the progress of the fire. As you can see, the Siuslaw River is in close proximity, so that made short turnarounds for air resources. And those initial attack resources, the district, the rural fire departments, those logging resources were able to catch or hook the fire initially, which is, huge, kind of slowing the progress of the fire. But without incident management team one coming in, the district can't maintain that type of an attack for that long. We only have so many resources. That first 24 to 30 hours is where we spend all of our resources. And so really having that incident management team able to come in with more resources and, not catch the fire because the fire was largely caught, but hold on to it, mop it up, and get it into a position where it was able to, 8 days later when they transitioned, withstand the 45-mile-an-hour winds that they were seeing there and not leave its footprint. So that's, where the initial attack that I talked about, and then just working with partners, utilizing our complete and coordinated system for, industrial resources, rural fire departments, it's an all hands approach to catch these fires. And I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you, Justin. Next slide, Rachel.
Thanks, Patience and Justin. Patience, did you have anything else to add on the fires? Okay, I'm gonna kind of switch gears here and refocus on some fire prevention projects that we have going on currently and in the future by various agencies. So I'm gonna cover what Lane County Planning is doing. Patience will talk a little bit about emergency management's work. ODF has some projects, and as well as the State Fire Marshal. So before we start, I kind of wanted to cover the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, or the CWPP. I think this is a great place to start the discussion, at least for the county's work in wildfire mitigation and prevention projects, because this is the guiding plan for those future projects. This plan was established in 2005 and was most recently underwent a major update in 2020. And the CWPP is a comprehensive document, but I want to focus on some of the priority action items that were identified in that update, because that's guiding much of the work that's occurring in the county currently. Some of the priority action items include updating land use regulations for wildfire hazard. That's a big one that LMD is focusing on. Patience is working on identifying priority areas for an evacuation plan. And we're also focusing on utilizing wildfire risk maps for collaboration in high-risk areas and fuel reduction projects. Patients touch a bit on conducting a more comprehensive outreach program. And the last priority is providing landowner assistance for fuels reduction projects. So looping back to the outreach program, the CWPP steering committee has been really focused on increasing outreach regarding mitigation, preparedness, and response, and creating materials for those initiatives. And this specific project is going to focus on promoting wildfire risk reduction activities for private and public lands within Lane County. And it's going to involve hiring a contractor to develop a coordinated seasonal outreach campaign that includes community and demographic specific education materials to promote effective risk reduction practices and advertise landowner assistance programs in the wildland urban interface. So that's a big focus right now coming out of the CWPP and one of the action items of that plan. And this is also going to include creating a comprehensive website or a focused place where community members can go to get kind of a comprehensive view of what they can be doing on their properties. And this is very similar to a project that Deschutes County has going on, which is called it's called Project Wildfire. So that's something that we've been looking at as we're working on our own efforts. And then lastly, I'll mention that the CWPP also calls for an update every 2 years. So emergency management will be looking at initiating an update to this plan this summer. And then I want to move into what specifically Land Management Division has going on in terms of wildfire mitigation. We're involved in several wildfire prevention initiatives, but I would say most directly to influencing the landscape is the FireWise program, which is a grant assistance program for landowners conducting fire mitigation on their property, such as establishing fuel breaks and upgrades to their structures for the purpose of home hardening against wildfires. And in the materials that were provided for this item today, there were examples specifically of properties within the Holiday Farm fire area. And we did provide a variety of examples, some structures which went through the FireWise program and did not survive the fire, and some of which did. I think that really shows how volatile that specific fire was, but also shows how effective the FireWise program can be in saving structures. And I'll also point out that the FireWise program is also utilized as an outreach and education tool for property owners. So it's not just for those who are involved in the grant program, but provides a lot of information for property owners who want to do some of that work on their own. And then the other initiative that I wanted to talk about was the fire siting standards project that Land Management has going on currently. And this project is focused mainly on 2 phases. The first phase is updating forest zone fire siting standards, which includes updating codes regarding property access and updating defensible space requirements to be consistent with most current fire science. And then also looking at some new water supply requirements for properties. And then the second phase of that project is to explore fire mitigation standards and defensible space on a county-wide basis. So not just looking at forest zoning, but looking at all properties and having some sort of fire mitigation standards for those properties. Because as we know, wildfire does not care about what a property is zoned. And there are definitely properties that may be zoned rural residential that still have significant fire risk on them. And then related to the fire siting standards project, I want to talk a bit about Senate Bill 762. This was a piece of legislation that was passed in June of 2021, and it was a wildfire legislation that outlines a number of wildfire mitigation efforts, but most significantly to the fire siting standards projects. Senate Bill 762 requires statewide mapping of wildfire risk, and it also requires minimum defensible space standards for high wildfire risk areas. And so this bill has the potential to it also has the potential to affect the statewide land use planning program and comprehensive planning and zoning ordinances. So there's a lot of aspects to this bill that have the potential to significantly affect the fire siting standards project. And I don't want to get into the weeds of that project and that intersection today. But I will note that staff is planning to return to the board for a work session in February, and we'll be discussing the details of that bill and how it affects the fire siting standards project, because we realize that is a a really significant project. It has a lot of implications for fire mitigation and for this topic that we're discussing today. And so we'll be returning with a lot more detail on that bill. But for now, I'm going to turn it back to Patience so that she can discuss some of emergency management's fire prevention work.
Thank you, Rachel. This is a list of hazard mitigation grant projects that we've submitted. It's not all inclusive. There are a number of mitigation projects that are being put forward by Public Works for the roads and seismic upgrades and retrofitting of some of our infrastructure out in the community. These ones are specifically the ones I'm working on in my office or in coordination with the recovery in the Holiday Farm Fire area, specifically with the McKenzie schools and storm hardening and the work that Matt McCrae is doing. So first, I'll start with the fuels reduction project. This project is set to be somewhere around a $500,000 project, and it's specifically in the McKenzie Fire and Rescue area, the footprint. Chief Busich has really been leading the effort thus far, and we do have a contractor on board helping us leverage those dollars and approach homeowners to participate in fuels reduction projects within that footprint. And I feel like we hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll have a number of homeowners jumping on board, but we shall see in the near future how many folks we can get. We're going to be doing a push soliciting homeowners to come to the table and have a conversation about fuels reduction around their homes in some of that very rural community areas. The state set aside $20 million to cover the match for locals. So the hazard mitigation grant funding is a 75% federal share, 25% local match. And fortunately for us, the state set aside money for us to cover the local match requirements. So these dollars that you're seeing here will be covered at 100%, and our grant applications are due to the state next week. So we're working fast and furiously on getting these complete and signed off and submitted for approval from OEM, Oregon Emergency Management, and FEMA. Chief, did you have anything you'd like to add specifically to the fuels reduction project before I move on?
I do not. Thank you, Patience.
Very good. The cities of Eugene and Springfield are also doing some significant work in the wildland urban interface. They also sent an email today with some flyers that I'll get over to the board that specifically speaks to their projects in the South Lane interface, where Lane County and the city of Eugene's urban interface come together, primarily in the Ridgeline area. They have performed or completed 44 acres of fuels reduction within that community utilizing Bureau of Land Management grant dollars. They haven't moved forward with 762 application or funding due to lack of staff to complete that work, but they are about to move forward on another fuels reduction project here in the next month. As I said, I will send their documentation forward for the board's review into the future, but know that there are some maps that are showing their areas of focus in the, what we call the WUI or wildland urban interface areas. The Dogami project, Dogami is working on a risk map reduction mapping project, and we're writing a letter of support to fund that. They're also leveraging hazard mitigation grant dollars to fund that project, and hopefully we'll have something. I think we anticipate a product, I want to say in the summer, the July or August, right around when we're supposed to be updating our CWPP, our Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And then next up on the list here is the hazard mitigation plan update. Our hazard mitigation plan, as you know, is a 5-year plan, and it is due for an update here. And we will begin that update this spring in coordination with the University of Oregon program. To get this updated, we will be including all of our incorporated cities, special districts, including utilities, water districts, and fire districts, so that they're able to take advantage of these funding streams that are becoming available and much more digestible for the end user to complete the process to get access to these funds. The Disaster 4562 is really what's provided these funds for us this far. And the coming dollars, there will be another big grant round to include CBDGDR community block grant funding, as well as COVID hazard mitigation grant dollars that'll be coming around pretty soon as well. So hopefully we'll have this fine-tuned and we'll be in a good place to continue to apply for these dollars and leverage them here locally to put those hands into the community members and boost the local economy into the future while all mitigating our risk. I'll just call your attention to the little table there at the bottom, the Wildfire Public Outreach and Warning Project that Rachel and I both had touched on. That's that coordinated effort with the CWPP subcommittee with OSFM, the Lane County Fire Defense Board chiefs, ODF, and many other partners that are going to be working on this project, leveraging these funds, and also purchasing radios for the vulnerable population or the very rural population, and handing those out in some form or fashion within Lane County to meet the needs. And there'll be more on that project as it further develops. And that's to the tune of $750,000, which is huge. We've got some dollars at our fingertips to really make a solid product. And I would note that we're also including the utilities on that project as well. As you all know, the public safety power shutoff protocols and what are their mitigation strategies, and how are we sharing that information with our community, and how are we ensuring that it speaks for all of us in getting that message across, and it's a coordinated message to our community members is imperative to be solid. And then the Wildfire Defensible Space Project with Chief Busich, and then the McKenzie School Storm Hardening retrofit. That's really bringing that school up to snuff to have backup power and be a facility that could be a shelter, as it has performed in the last couple of disasters, to include Snowmageddon, as well as the Holiday Farm Fire, and acting as a recovery center and supporting the community's needs. And leveraging seismic rehab funds in the same token. So we'll be taking federal dollars and matching with state dollars to really implement a solid solution in that community. And I'm hopeful that we can mirror this across Lane County and other areas to meet our needs. And that's what I have for this slide, Rachel.
Thanks. I'm going to turn it over to Justin to talk a bit about what ODF is doing.
Yeah, so I'm speaking for the eastern half of Lane County again, but Western Lane has very similar, positions and programs over there. In eastern Lane County, we have a 5-person fuels reduction crew that goes out and helps the landowners create defensible space, working on access for firefighters, first responders getting into these homes, as well as the landowners in case of evacuations. Part of my position is to apply and secure grant funds to do this work. So I apply for Western States Fire Managers, community assistance grants. Those are largely funded by federal government, USDA, Bureau of Land Management. Also, recently with the Senate Bill 762, I'm helping some of the Firewise communities apply for grant funding to do work in their communities, as well as some of the larger projects, such as Oak Ridge is applying for like a landscape scale restoration project to treat some larger acres in the area. Between myself and the fire planner in Western Lane, we have worked to develop 15 new Firewise communities. And this really, there's a couple of benefits to that, because part of this is education. What we've learned some important lessons, especially with fires like Holiday Farm, as to the importance of some of the really small stuff that happens around the home. And, you can't just come in and do it one time. So it's maintenance. So this allows us to, reach multiple people, go out and do home assessments, get some community driven stuff done. And this allows people in those communities, maybe elderly folks or people that don't have the financial ability to do that, to seek help within the communities and expand upon the grant funds we have. A lot of these Firewise communities are new. This is kind of a starting point. So, that's not to say that these communities are perfectly Firewise right now, but it's a stepping stone. Like I said, it's a start to the education, a start to the work. We do a lot of community engagement, community meetings, staff booths at the home shows, participate a large portion in this landowner education. We also, we can help landowners, supplement if they want to do the work themselves with these grants. We can give them some reimbursement. You can also help them hire contractors, such as the picture here you can see, for some of our high risk areas. This is, if you guys are familiar with Marcola Road and the Sky High community, we did a fuels reduction program at the base of the hill there, because that's always one of our areas that is concerning. So we were able to work with the landowners to get in and clear out some of this, and hopes and, kind of develop a plan for them to maintain that and make that community safer in the future. And those are the types of things that we're working on doing. I guess one more thing, we also have the FFR, or Federal Forest Restoration Program. As part of that, in Eastern Lane, we have a Good Neighbor Authority program. That's an agreement with the U.S. Forest Service, where Oregon Department of Forestry folks can go out and help increase the pace scale of the restoration that's being done on the national forests, primarily the Willamette, at least for right now. We're still trying to build the program to some of the other forests in the area, such as the Siuslaw, the Mount Hood to the north, and there's other DNA programs throughout the state. Just as I mentioned, the Forest Service covers a vast area around us. We're trying to increase the pace and the scale of some of that restoration work, and especially where some of these lands abut private, and work towards that landscape scale resiliency. I think that's it.
Thanks, Justin. So I'm just going to move through a couple of other things here, mainly involvements in how agencies are being affected by Senate Bill 762 and what they're working on. So electric utility wildfire mitigation plans was one thing that I wanted to highlight. Senate Bill 762 requires that public utilities operate in compliance with a risk-based wildfire protection plan that's evaluated by the Public Utility Commission. So that was talked about a little bit in the packet, and then EWEB was kind enough to put together a memo, a summary and a memo of the fire mitigation work that they have going on right now, including this wildfire mitigation plan. And then I'll also touch on the Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office, which has also experienced some changes as a result of the bill. Mainly the bill resulted in the creation of 7 new fire risk reduction specialists across the state, who were going to focus on reducing wildfire risk for the next 2 years. And then after that, my understanding is that we'll expand to other hazards as well in the future. And the bill has also allocated a bit of funding for the State Fire Marshal's Office, mainly for wildfire mitigation, prevention, and education. And they will also be involved in a fuels reduction program, focusing specifically on socially and economically vulnerable communities, critical and emergency infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, and facilities that serve seniors. So there's a lot of work going on in the State Fire Marshal's office as well, that I just wanted to briefly highlight. And I think that wraps it up for us. I do want to thank you for the opportunity to present on the wildfire mitigation topics, and we're happy to discuss and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Surslev. Wow, what an amazing presentation. A great team you assembled to give us all the information today. Far more than I can personally digest, but we'll continue with discussion questions from the commissioners at this point in time. Do I have questions from the board? And Commissioner Trigger, I don't see your hand.
Oh, I raised my real hand. There's my little yellow cartoon one.
Vice Chair Trigger.
It is also a high five to the team that just presented. That was a phenomenal presentation. Thank you so much. It's just a really important part of my learning. We've had several comments across the day today about different jurisdictions and who's responsible for what, but ultimately this is obviously something that impacts us all. So thank you. one of the reasons I asked for this for a couple of different reasons. And there was so much there. I'm trying to organize, even though I jotted a few notes. I guess I'm not sure, Chair, if you want to do rounds or if I can run through sort of a few points and get answers, since we had different presenters and touched on different aspects of the work at once.
Let's continue with you. I'll stop you at about 40 minutes.
Perfect. I bet I can cover it in 38. So starting at the very beginning of the presentation, the chart with the number of fires and acres burned by ignition source, that was something, part of what prompted this was our conversations around fireworks and limiting or banning the use of fireworks. And so ignition source data was of interest in light of that conversation. And what I noticed quickly was from the 2019, or from the whatever the earliest year to the most recent, the number of arsons was way up and the debris fire ignition source was way down. Those were the two biggest gulfs. The arson, I don't know if you have an answer on that one, but I imagine one of the reasons we had so many fewer debris fires in the most recent years perhaps has to do with some policy and some program work. And that's, of course, where I think we're most interested in hearing is what are the opportunities for us as a board to support or enact or amplify existing policy. So that's my first question, is that ignition source data and that slide. And if anyone wants to comment about the big increase in arson and decrease in debris as ignition sources.
I'll take a stab at that one. So as far as the debris burning, it kind of fluctuates. You can see a pretty large number in 2018, 2019, you see 2020 didn't have as much. Largely that could have been from impacts of the fire. Also, we don't get the strong east wind events every fall. And like I mentioned in the presentation, especially with industrial burning, oftentimes that's when we have the problems. And that's not to say they can't be problematic, but oftentimes, there might be a lot of acres burned, but generally they're out in the industrial lands. Oftentimes, once they kind of get out of those units, we're able to catch them. So they're a nuisance and they cost money. But for that context, those aren't generally our fires that are causing mass, structure damage to homes, resources like that. So, definitively I can't say, but I would say likely just the conditions that were present in that year might be the lack of the decline. And as far as arsons, I don't have a good reason for that. We mentioned that the Sweet Creek fire was an arson. He was apprehended. We also had some problems in Eastern Lane County with some arson fires, and over the years we have had a few different instances of that. So I'm not sure. There's no necessarily, no ties to the individuals, or nothing necessarily plotted out that we're aware of. So just seems to be we have some individuals that seem to like to start fires.
Great, thank you. And I recognize, and this leads into my other question or comment, that these are wildland fires, and I've had briefings from Ms. Parisi. I'm glad to see her on the panel today. This issue, I'm really interested, of course, generally, but particularly because of my district, about this urban interface work, because while the rural communities are far more resource constrained, and some don't even have their own fire departments, and it takes longer to just travel the miles to respond, the density of structures and population in the urban areas, particularly at the South Hills, and the what happens to wind when you have a fire in something like a hillside like the South Hills is really of huge concern to me and my district. If we had a fire and winds anything like we had up the Mackenzie in the South Hills, we'd be telling a very different story about structures and lives lost. And while that is predominantly in City of Eugene Fire District, the response falls to Lane County if we have a disaster of that level. And so I will be very interested to learn more, about that urban interface. And I guess I just wonder, this is probably largely a question for Ms. Winningham, about what is our responsibility as Lane County to respond if there's a fire district that there's a massive fire in where there's loss of structures and life, but then Lane County's role in the response, and of course how we want to work with those urban fire districts to get out in front of to avoid that to begin with.
I'll take that first part of that, and I'll defer to Chief Busich on conflagrations to some degree. So in the unincorporated areas, you know, with fire districts such as South Hills, it really is the fire chiefs working together, and the Fire Defense Board assembles task forces in high hazard, high weather events, and they act quickly. They have a protocol in place to where they move swiftly and respond. If it were an event that were on the South Hills on the backside that were the county's responsibility, we would move forward with activating an emergency operations center and a call center to support the displaced population and first responders in the field. I would also caveat that with, I think Justin led this earlier, that incident management team resources at the state level and the federal level are sometimes, depending on the time of year, not available to us. And we must move forward with what we have available here in Lane County. And we're very fortunate to have a pretty solid, robust team of staff within the fire district and the law enforcement areas to support us had we moved forward without an incident management team as a resource just to meet those needs. Chief, did you have anything you'd like to add, or Kyle?
I will just add, Commissioner Trigger, just in case you don't know, that fire districts and cities, even though we're different budgets and stuff, we work together a lot. We have things we call automatic aid agreements and mutual aid agreements, meaning that through our dispatch center, we're going to provide somebody else up to 24 hours of our time for free. We're not going to charge you, and they're not going to charge us. And that's, you know, that's how we assemble to help out with these larger grass fires, these wildland fires. You know, your Coburgs, your McKinseys, none of us can do it ourselves. We rely on ODF a lot, obviously. And ODF protects a majority of our district, but we have a lot of rural districts that ODF doesn't have protection for various reasons. And so, I mean, we call them as a mutual aid agency to come help us. And then, not to spend too much time, but when that mutual aid agreement is kind of exhausted, there's still a threat. That's when, you know, you get together with your county fire defense board chief, or I know the commissioners have had to help with this in the past. And that's when you call the state fire marshal's office and you say, hey, we need more help. And once that gets approved, that's when you get the teams to come in, other resources, and that allows those additional crews that respond on the first day or whatever to go back to their home base and still respond to their calls there. That's called the Conflagration Act, and it also helps out with resources. Unfortunately, during the holiday fire event around the state, that wasn't really an option for us because a good part of the state was on fire. And a lot of those resources come from like a district like mine. And if it's 100 degrees outside and low humidities, I'm not going to send somebody out of state or out of our area because I want them to stay home. So you get a little stingy with your crews, where our resources get really thin at that point. And that happened to us last year during the bootleg fire. We had a lot of hard time getting resources for that reason. So we try really hard to work with each other up front. And then as things just keep going and going, you have to start reaching out for more help.
Terrific.
And I would just circle back, Commissioner Trigger, with one thing that my blue sky day job is mitigation strategies for the community, right? So I try to work with Justin and his counterpart on the other side of Lane County, and we do outreach and presentations before COVID was a thing, and informing our community members of how they can be informed and be prepared for themselves, their families, and their neighbors. That's the other part of my job, is mitigation.
Well, that is a perfect segue that I can ask my final two questions in one question, which is around mitigating fuel loads. Mr. Busich, you mentioned, we need to raise our standards, right? That's a policy issue. So looking to you all for recommendations to us as a board, what are the opportunities and how might we do that to support those mitigation efforts? And the other piece of that, you mentioned communication. Specifically, what kinds of strategies or tools do we have in place to communicate with non-English speakers and also with our deaf-blind community in the case of emergencies? I heard, particularly in COVID response, from several members of the deaf-blind community about their lack of access to accurate information and how working through certain interpreters who aren't vetted can lead to the spread of misinformation or just a lack of information. Thank you.
I would start with the purpose of that grant that we've applied for is for some of that transcribing and ensuring that we do have coordinated messaging in all languages, including the demographic you spoke of. And we will cross that bridge with some of these dollars here in the very near future. And I'm extremely looking forward to that. The radio purchase will also include accessibility features for the deaf and blind to support their needs so that they can be alerted. There's some bed shaking component that's an added part to the radio that we can buy, and it is being included in the grant application moving forward. I would also say that for the board and how you can support us, you know, that one of the things that working with Chief Busich, and I'm learning more as I go, because I'm going to say I'm still new here at the county for a while, because I'm still new here at the county. And the FireWise program, everybody has their own FireWise program. So Justin at ODF, they have a FireWise program, and the county has a FireWise program. And me as a property owner, it's tough to navigate. Well, what does that mean, and how am I eligible? And this project that we put together with Chief Busich District is really going to help get the dollars into the hands of those people with the greatest needs. So the elderly, the vulnerable populated areas that don't understand how to navigate that, the low income folks that don't necessarily understand how to jump through all of the hoops that are required to attain the resource. And we have a great need to reduce the risk in that area. And so this project here, I think, is really going to show us if it's attainable. You know, if we were like, here's the money, we're going to do this work for you, all you have to do is sign on this bottom line, how much easier can we make it for the property owners so that they're not having to navigate through each of those different programs and areas. Another thing that I've started in my office is working directly with ODF and FireWise and utilizing the CWPP subcommittee and being present at booths, at the fair, at the home shows, and having that coordinated effort of getting our messages across as a group, and rather than being siloed and trying to share the message as one-offs, we can share some resources together collaboratively to meet the needs for our community going forward. Chief, did you have anything you'd like to add?
I'll just add that everything to do with fuel reduction right now is voluntary, and that's right. I mean, not every time if you want to build a new house, you have some code standards, but right now, when you go to someone's house, and I think that's why I'm excited about potentially getting grant money, because I can say, well, if we can do this for free, would you be willing to do it? And like Justin's mentioned before, once that neighbor hears the other neighbor getting work done, hopefully they're interested. But right now, we visited probably 50 homes. And a lot of folks are the ones that call you for your guidance. I have the beautiful landscape, right? The ones that don't call you are the ones that need the help. And so we're trying to work on how we get that message out and how we encourage those folks that it's really important to do this. We're not trying to make you have a better view of the road and more road noise. We're actually trying to protect your home and encourage you to do it. We do have some elderly folks that we're looking forward to working with because they just don't have the means to do it themselves. And you know, a lot of the grants are a match, or you know, you do the work and you'll get reimbursed. And the beauty of this one, we hope, is that we can actually perform the work and potentially use like the Youth Corp, which is another exciting program to put those folks to work and teach them a skill, and which might lead to a further career. And you know, and Rachel's she's probably rolling her eyes now because she knows what's coming next. But some of our codes, we really, you know, we've been pushing for these for a long time, and I really want to keep momentum going on these. You know, F1, F2 has a standard. Rural residential, you know, we struggle. We have a hard time getting up driveways still to even for an ambulance. And I know the challenge with the county and the planning department is enforcement is really difficult because it takes people to enforce it, and it takes a lot of people. So I know 762 talks about enforcement, but I think Rachel alluded to the fact that it's like 762 is focused on high risk and extreme. And I'm not an ODF map expert, but I have a good hunch this area is not going to qualify in that area. So 762 is out there. And yes, it's going to provide a lot of funding for other things, but how it's going to impact us as far as enforcement, I don't see that as a big thing. I think Lane County is going to have to work on their own enforcement. And I also want to throw out another thing with the bill that the fire marshal is working on. And the reason I do this because I'm chairing the committee, but you know, they're investing $25 million from that bill to increase the apparatus around the state. There's some districts that really struggle with to keep things running. We're hoping to build several different types of wildland apparatus that we can give to these communities, and at least they'll have a nice running vehicle, and hopefully the goal is to keep the fire small with something that doesn't break down en route to the fire. So that's a big plug for the fire marshal's office, and I'm happy to contribute to that committee. But yeah, for me and Commissioner Trigger, anybody else, I know that Commissioner Buck knows this. I'm happy to give you a tour of the rural districts and just show you some of the stuff that we deal with. And it's not just and it's nobody's fault. It's just how things are. But if there's anything we can do to improve it, we're certainly working on it. And I know Keir Miller's heard from me over the years and such. Probably when he heard my name on this, he probably wasn't too thrilled about it. But I truly want to, anything I can do to help move some of these policies and procedures forward, I'm happy to help.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Commissioner Trigger, for a robust portfolio of questions that answered a lot of the questions I think that the commissioners may have. But we'll move along to the balance of the commission right now. Commissioners, questions? Then Vice Chair Trigger, it seems that, oh, there we go. Commissioner Burney.
Well, hey, Commissioner Bozovich did the right thing. And
I see that now.
Commissioner, I'll either defer to you or not. It's up to you. Okay. First off, thank you all very much. If I can hold on to a third of what you said, I'll be doing better than I usually do. It worries me that I've been a commissioner now for a few years, but long enough to actually understand some of this alphabet soup of the fire mitigation industry, if you would. A couple of dumb questions and then sort of a comment. What does EWeber, what do utilities mean by grid hardening?
I might have to defer to, oh, there you
yeah,
go.
Do you want me to jump on? Hi,
that would be great.
Hi, Janine.
I'm sure I'd be happy to answer that. I think that can be a range of things from undergrounding utilities from overhead to underground. It can be using less flammable materials like replacing wooden poles with ductile iron poles. It could be changing the configuration of your overhead system. So reframing, you're basically making investments so that the utility infrastructure is less likely to cause an ignition. So it's a whole series of different kinds of things.
Thank you very much. And don't leave yet, because I want to follow a couple of follow-up questions. So does that basically mean improving the existing infrastructure that some might argue the utility should have done in the first place, or making modifications based on the new climate we find ourselves in?
Well, I can't speak for all utilities, but I would say that I think there's a mix of both. There's new technology out there that we're learning a lot from California that they've maybe had in place for 10 years that we're seeing as applicable up here. Non-explosive fuses, you really you're balancing your investment with your risk. And, 10 years ago, we probably wouldn't be talking about wildfire risk and utility ignitions like we are today. So I think just in terms of the necessity of climate and drought and where our infrastructure is, we're going to be doing things differently out of necessity.
Last question for the utility spokesperson, my friend. Has there been much of a cost benefit done on undergrounding utilities versus putting solar arrays and storage and microgrids in communities that are somewhat remote, like rural communities?
I'm not aware of any cost benefit analysis that would compare undergrounding to like a microgrid type of system. So I'm not aware of that. I think that both of those options can be viable depending on what your solution you're trying to get to. Certainly, I've seen, I just was on a call earlier today where in California, where they're having a lot of public safety power turnoffs, they're using a small hydrogen fuel cell to light up a traffic signal on a very busy intersection. So, there's just, we're going to see a lot of different technologies in play over the next couple of years.
Thank you very much.
It's important.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was just going to say the cost benefit's important. I'd say we're really early in that kind of work at UWeb. Maybe other utilities are as well.
Thank you very much, Jeanine. Chair, could I won't take even close to 38 minutes.
No, we're about 90 minutes into a 60-minute item right now. So please, it's an important item.
Thank you very much. Patience, or Ms. Winningham, in that regard, I really want to compliment what I heard you say about utilizing part of an existing facility. I think you talked about McKenzie School District, and use it to beat on the drum of, I believe, my opinion, we really need to create more community-based evacuation centers that can double as warming centers on cold nights, that can triple as cooling centers on hot days, that can quadruple as clean air centers during smoke events. And so it sounds like you're kind of moving in that direction. And I really, to the degree any of you can influence policy to get away from these, mega billion-dollar things to more community-based centers for this, I just think that's a good thing. And my question, and by the way, Chief Busich, I really appreciate and enjoy your perspective. One thing you said, I'd like to come back to it. I would say it this way: you were talking about people not really yet. You haven't figured out a way to crack that nut of really getting people involved in their own fire safety, whether it relates to zoning changes or what have you, which is kind of a bitter pill to swallow. You'd think at this point we'd all be pretty aware. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. As you move forward with this, if there are any lessons learned, because I see that as a real issue for the county on multiple areas, which is public input and understanding. And I don't know, but it'd be cool if part of your strategy was getting to kids, right? Getting in schools to kids, so they start growing up with this awareness, because it's certainly a world that they're growing into. I don't know if you have any comment on that, and that's all I've got. But thank you all so much. It's a big deal.
Thank you, Commissioner Bernie. We'll move along to Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. So first, just a quick question. Justin, on your initial chart about causes of starts and all that, there was one category that said under investigation, and it was the largest number of acres. And I saw it just 1 in 2020. So my assumption is the Holiday Farm fire is still being listed as under investigation. Is that an accurate assumption?
Yeah, that's correct. It's and the Holiday Farm fire actually started on U.S. Forest Service jurisdiction, so they are the ones handling the investigation, but it is still technically under investigation.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that folks understood that, and I appreciate Joe's questions about utility hardening. Part of that also is about utility operations, and what we're learning is, when you're in these red flag situations, about having the ability to change your breaker trip reset settings. And what you see on most electrical systems is they're set up to reset the breakers 3 times, because quite often what can happen is just a touch of a wire, maybe because a branch falls and flings it for a second, or wind blows it. So the breaker trips, resets. Problem is, if that wire is actually down on the ground and the second 2 cycles happen, that's when we end up with the ignition that's a human caused ignition in a condition where we don't see lightning. And our east wind events are not lightning type events in the fall. They're purely a heat dry event, and it usually takes a human caused ignition to start seeing what we saw. Of course, the windstorm that comes with it can be that ignition start, but even then it has to be some human, the windstorm interacting with human infrastructure. The windstorm in itself is not going to start a fire. So that's a really important piece, is this whole change in utility operations. Understanding that also means that you're placing your electrical grid in a much more unstable position. And there's going to be shutoffs and shutdowns or just blackouts that happen that wouldn't normally happen. And dividing the grid up into microgrids sounds great, but I'll point to some of our small special districts and how much, and some of the rural co-ops that are small with low amounts of customers, and how difficult it is for a smaller sized utility to maintain their infrastructure at, at today's standards. Mapleton Water District, Douglas Electric Co-op, I can point out to multiple places where that lack of customer density and trying to maintain an infrastructure is very difficult. That all said, I kind of wish you'd shown today's drought graphic. I've got it. I'm not going to bother showing it. It's just, there's now no longer any red in Lane County. In fact, there's even some yellow. It's a significant difference from November 4th to today. And we're at 126% of snowpack. So fortunately, we're doing a lot better. It's still going to take a pretty damn good rest of the water year to get us out of the woods. I want to talk a little bit because, Justin, I work with, West Lane all the time and the folks over here. And you guys do a fantastic job. The ODF protected lands, the Holiday Farm fire event was rare. You guys do such a great job of initial attack and then managing fires so well. I mean, there's been a few larger fires, but for the most part, you don't see that sort of large event or amount of acres burned. What I have tracked over my years as a commissioner and being on the Natural Resources Committee at AOC is the difference between, the fire starts on U.S. Forest Service protected land compared to ODF protected lands. It's usually about even, but the acreage burned is 80 to 90% U.S. Forest Service, 10 to 20% ODF protected. And part of that has to deal with their U.S. Forest Service directives on wildfire suppression. And part of those directives basically say, let it burn, particularly if it's in a wilderness area. And we saw the results of that with Chetco Bar. And we actually, one of the fires on Labor Day was actually the continuation of a U.S. Forest Service burn that got blown into other areas, Lion's Head. So there needs to be a concerted effort to deal with U.S. Forest Service's management and wildfire suppression policy. And we need as a board to be pushing that at the federal level with our federal delegations. There needs to be change. You can't, some of their guidances work great maybe in Alaska, to let a lightning cause fire in a wilderness go, but in the Kalmiopsis that's shaped like an amoeba and has private lands interlacing it, letting it burn is not the answer. Letting it burn in Lion's Head wasn't the answer. We have to have some differentiation, time of year, differentiation, geographic location on those U.S. Forest Service directives, which are not law. They're policy written at the bureaucratic level that we need to get changed. And I just want to bring that into perspective. That's where we're seeing some real issues. And if we're talking about protecting people and property, we don't need stuff running off of U.S. Forest Service protected areas into our wildland interface areas. So we definitely need to, as part of our whole strategy for wildfire protection, we have to be pushing there. Finally, I just want to thank Darren for bringing up water sources. One of the things we're seeing is here in my district is Bureau of Land Management wants to get rid of Horton Pond. They want to remove the dam and get rid of the pond. It's one of the few places you can dip a helicopter within miles. And later on, when we're under agenda team requests, I'll expand on this a little bit, but I'd like the board to schedule some kind of work session and look at what we can do to try and intervene. The Bureau of Land Management started their NEPA process with alternatives that would have saved the pond, and they stopped it for COVID. And when they restarted it, the only alternative they were looking at was dam removal. And the community, local community, and all their feedback has been save the pond, and they're completely ignoring their public input and charging ahead with dam removal. We're going to need to step in, I think, as a board and exercise some of our cooperating agency pushback on that. So I'll talk about that later in agenda team requests. So I just want to thank everybody for their participation in this. It's a big issue. I've been looking at fire interface stuff since, Janine knows how it used to drive me crazy looking at the South Hills as a water engineer. And the fact that I had to just about move mountains to get a new reservoir placed in the South Hills to protect people during fire events, because they didn't want to have a few trees cut down for a reservoir, or a pipeline that had to come down for that reservoir. So it's a big issue. It's been a big issue. I know that, that the Eugene fire folks have always been concerned, particularly about the South Hills, Southeast Hills, in particular, where the roads are too narrow to do evacuations. Some of that area, Capitol and up there, Shasta and all, it's going to be bad news if we ever get a fire start at the bottom of the hill. So hopefully, though, the fact that there's a lot of irrigation going on in Eugene from EWEB's water system will help keep that from traveling fast. But thank you, everybody. And Chief, I appreciate your concern about driveways. I've been up enough of them to see constituents around here. Sometimes I'm amazed people live on some of these driveways. 20% gravel is hard to get a vehicle up.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich. This has been a great round of discussion, and we'll step along to Commissioner Buck. Before that, I'll mention that I spent the day with my grandchildren on Sunday up at Horton Pond. What a wonderful gem that is in the middle of the wilderness, adjacent to the town of Horton. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Our emergency manager still mentioned she's new, but I do know that we came on at the same time, and our initiation into Lane County has happened over and over again. So you're certainly part of the county and ingrained in everything that we're doing emergency management, and appreciate your work. Appreciate this report by all of you. There was one question in the very beginning with the list of all the ignition sources, and one of them stood out to me because it was a very low number, and it just said juveniles. And that's a noun, and for me, not necessarily a verb or an action, so I wasn't really sure what that meant. And so I was hoping to have just a little bit of clarification on that. And I had another comment.
Yeah, Commissioner Buck, I'm not sure that I caught your question. Which line was it?
It was the graph of the various ignition sources for each year.
And so a large number, you said?
It was a very low number, actually. It said juveniles.
So the really large number that stands out to me, Chief Bozovich already touched on, would be the under investigation. That would be the Holiday Farm. For juveniles, all I have is one fire for 1/10 of an acre, looking at my chart.
Right. What does juvenile in that case mean? I mean, are we talking about a kid who did something, but what is the something? Because it's not the noun, it's the verb that I'm looking for.
I understand what you're getting at now. So generally when we have juveniles, that can be kids playing with matches, just kids playing with fire in general. So that sort of that would be the most common cause that I have come across in my career. That can even go down to things such as fireworks, or something of that nature, just generally in a playing type of a manner, or an intrigued.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm, because I probably would have put that in another category because of the action that they were doing, but I wanted to be certain that I didn't have a different definition.
Yep.
And just as a whole, I in our discussion here, I too hope that there are policy changes that as a group you'll pull forward to the board that we can change or alter that might be able to affect the numbers in some downward trend. You are all the experts, and with my experience through this megafire, I've been able to track pretty much everything that you mentioned in the entire report and all the acronyms. It's not an easy read for people that aren't in the industry or haven't been affected or aren't in emergency response. So the education that we give to the public is really important and meaningful. And we haven't traditionally been locally in a culture that we understand what it means to live with fire. And that's pretty much what we have to do. People who live in rural communities, like myself in unincorporated Lane County, we're out here because we have land. It's beautiful. Some really, really want to be huddled in those trees. That's the whole reason they came to live in this area. And how we educate the public as to what that means to live with fire and live with its ramifications, I think it's going to be challenging. It's necessary, but extremely challenging, because it might mean giving up part of the reasons they moved to a rural community in the first place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. And once again, a great conversation that we've had. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg regarding what this board and future boards will do in terms of protecting people who choose to live in rural areas, but not just in rural areas. As Commissioner Bozovich has pointed out, a fire starting low on the South Hills could be far more destructive with far fewer acres than a large fire in a rural area. I personally have no further questions. Unless the board has further questions, we'll move along with the agenda. Thank you to the panel for being with us today. And Commissioner Buck, you mentioned the folks that are presenting to us today are the experts. Beyond that, they are the heroes, and they represent the heroes who really step forward when the time is needed. So, and Commissioner Burney, I do see the yellow hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me. I just really want to underscore how great I think the whole notion of Youth Corps here is. I know of no greater mechanism to teach young people a work ethic, to have them talk to their friends about it, and to deal with this particular issue. So I remember the chief mentioned that. And I just think that's a great idea. And I don't know how we can support that, but if we can, please let us know.
I'll say that when I was a youth myself, when I was 16 and 17 years old, I worked for the Oregon Department of Forestry, and we did fight forest fires. We weren't the Youth Corps, but we were youth fighting forest fires. And you're right. Well, I'll tell you, working on those hillsides, whether you're at an active fire or preparing for or deacon fire trail, whatever it may be, that teaches you a work ethic. No question about it. So to the panel, once again, thank you so much, Patience. Thank you for the assembly of this panel. We hope to see you again soon in a peaceful environment such as this, as opposed to an emergency environment, which we see you far more frequently in the last year. So without further ado, we will move along in our agenda. And thank you so much. We'll move along to County Council. And Mr. Dingle, I see you are with us. County Council announcements.
Just two very brief ones. For the first time in a long time, I think I mentioned, the office is fully staffed with both attorneys and our support folks with the addition of Marcus Vier. So I wanted the board to know that. And second of all, I know the last couple of times I've reported on the progress that we've made with the opioid settlement. And I'm happy to report that the last jurisdiction that needs to sign it or needs to file the formal paperwork will do that tomorrow. And Oregon will be at 100% participation of the required entities, which means that we will get every single dime that is possible under the agreement. And that's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle. Any questions for Mr. Dingle? Then I will just state that to balance that orange thing on the wall behind you, little green thing that hangs on my wall, Mr. Dingle. Thank you very much. I will move it direct down the agenda then to Commissioners' business and announcements. Any announcements from the Board of Commissioners? I see none. And I do know we have future board assignment requests. And I believe I'll begin with you, Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you, Chair. And I thought you were going to give Mr. Dingle some stuff about last night's basketball game when you started pulling your O out.
How do you miss a 1 foot layup? How do you miss that? I don't know.
Oh, I've missed them all the time.
Yeah, believe me, I know how. That's why I'm a commissioner, not a former NBA basketball player. So I would like to get head nods from the board to ask, I guess it would be staff, probably Mr. Kyler, to maybe come back either with a memo or something about what possible actions the board can take concerning BLM's move to remove the dam at Horton Pond versus looking at alternate solutions. One of the things I think they could look at is some kind of jurisdictional transfer, and that would be to some other agency maybe that's willing to take long-term ownership. I understand BLM's not necessarily in the business of owning dams, and that's one of their reasons why they're leaning hard on removal. That, and it's considered a high hazard class dam because the community of Horton's downstream. And there's a need to do some fish passage improvements to it. That all said, there's other agencies that are used to having high hazard class dams like Corps of Engineers. And there may be some benefit to Lane County to look at, is the recreation facility something we might be able to manage like we do Armitage or Richardson, or some of Baker Bay and some of the other facilities that we manage with in conjunction with the Corps. There's got to be some better solution than let's just rip the dam out and get rid of a firefighting asset in the middle of the forest, and something that's been a huge community asset for years for recreation. So if I can get head nods to at least have staff do a review and maybe come back with a memo. I don't necessarily want to ask for a work session at this time, but I just want to understand, is there anything this agency can do to push back maybe against the dam removal?
I would join you with a head nod on that. I've been up there 3 times in the last month and a half, and the locals really do enjoy the amenity. And this is in the fall and winter. The summertime is just a remarkably vibrant place. Commissioner Burney, did I say that as the head?
Yeah, I was just, if I may clarify my head nod, I think that I think that commissioners, as long as if you except looking at whether the pluses and minuses of in fact eliminating that dam, as well as what we can do to provide input, I certainly would head nod that.
Thank you. And Commissioner Buck, I saw your head moving. Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Looks like Commissioner Bozic, you do have that, and we'll pass that along as a memo, Mr. Mokrisi, perhaps to Mr. Kyler, to put a notation together as to how we might proceed with information on that. Is that adequate, Mr. Commissioner Bozic?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
Perfect. Commissioner Buck.
I have an assignment request as well. It's in conjunction with one that we already have, but I think it needs some clarification. So this is in reference to a previous board assignment that we did actually last February. So it's almost been a year. And we haven't had a session on it yet regarding voters pamphlets on off-cycle years. That one is still outstanding. It's basically how we were going to figure out if there's some funding available to do that and seek that funding. I'm not sure it's been moved forward really in any way yet, but prior to really pushing that particular work session, it feels like it makes more sense for us to have a separate work session to discuss whether we want to have a policy as a county in place where we want to be able to have these voters pamphlets every year and every cycle before we go through all the effort of trying to find funding for them all. I ask this now because we're going to be going into the budget cycle here shortly for the next calendar, well, not calendar year, our county year through June 30th. And that will be next year where we have an off-cycle year. And we're going to, rotate back to this initial question again. And so I feel like it's prudent to have a work session to discuss that. I personally have a preference, but I don't think we should start there. I think we should start with just having a work session to discuss as a whole, as a board, whether we want this to be a county policy. And if so, then initiate those efforts to figure out how we would fund it, whether it be through our budget or whether we're seeking other state funds for it.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Any comments, questions, or agreement on that? Or Mr. Mokrisi, is there anything that you would need for clarification on that?
Chair, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Commissioner Bernie.
Mr. Mokrisi, I thought this was a done deal. No?
You thought what was a done deal, Commissioner?
I remember when this came up as an issue, and way back then I was chair and you and I talked more. And I thought you told me that this was something that simply needed to be built into the budget process and could be accommodated that way. My question is Commissioner Buck's request necessary or no from a county operations perspective?
Well, I would say, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Bernie, that we do need some direction from the board. It's really a policy decision on the board's part to determine whether or not you want to have a voter pamphlet. And so that's the question that has never really been resolved is the expectation and desire of the board to have a voter pamphlet in every election. And if so, what elections is it not funded and do we need to budget for it? So the budgetary issue is pretty straightforward in the sense that once we get direction from the board on what your position is on that question, then we can move forward and do the budgeting process. But I would say that what's unresolved is the policy question in front of the board.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I still have a lot to learn about when things are done and when they're not. So thank you, Commissioner Buck.
And thank you. And I'll, before I call on you, Vice Chair, Commissioner Buck, I think Mr. Mokrisi did agree that we've not really fully decided as to whether or not this board has a policy which is for a voters pamphlet at every year for every general and off election. So Vice Chair Trieger. I believe you may be muted.
Thank you. Apologies. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Buck, for bringing this issue back around. I just wanted to clarify or expand, I think the conversation I'd like us to have is a policy around how we, how or if our elections division has a role in educating voters about their ballot. And that way it leaves space for us to talk about, is there a physical voter pamphlet? Is there an online? What does that look like? And et cetera. So I'm just asking for it to not box us in, similar to Commissioner Bozovich's assignment request, rather than say, how do we take this on? It's what's happening here and what is our role? So I don't know if we needed that level of clarity, but I just wanted to make sure we weren't just doing an up or down to a paper voter pamphlet, but more a policy discussion about what are the options to one if that is not the policy direction. And I think it would be that way would maybe give us a few more options and a few more tools to work with.
Thank you, Vice Chair. That seems a little bit more elemental, perhaps. And Commissioner Book, would that wrap in with your request, do you suspect?
Yes.
Then it seems that you do have head nods surrounding that. And Mr. Mokrasky, do you need any more clarification on that request?
I don't think so.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I'll move along with any further board assignment requests. I see none. And I will then, Ms. Mokrasky, can you review your assignments?
So I think I have three. A couple of these are amendments. First is we will amend the current open assignment, I believe, related to the holiday farm fire updates, that those will happen quarterly. Then Commissioner Bozovich's request to have staff prepare a memo with recommendations on actions to take related to the BLM actions at Horton Pond. And then the third item is Commissioner Buck's request. And I think this is also an amendment to an open, because we have another open assignment related to a voter's pamphlet. And I think what we'll do is amend that one to clarify that we will bring forward a work session discussion with the board related to the question of whether or not the board wants to pursue having a voter pamphlet at each election. Does that capture it all?
That sounds accurate to me. Any comments on that from the board on Mr. Mokrasky's summary of assignments? Nope, Ms. Mokrasky, good job. Thank you. Then moving down the list, we have no executive session scheduled for this afternoon. Other business, then convening will be at 8:30 tomorrow morning for a budget kickoff with the leadership team. And I believe that is a budget committee, full budget committee involved in that, Mr. Mokrasky, do you know?
No, the budget committee is invited, but it's not a meeting of the budget committee. So does that make sense?
Say that again?
Yes, the budget committee members are invited, but it is not a meeting of the budget committee. It's a meeting. It's a meeting with the commissioners and the leadership in the organization.
That's totally
very good. Then we will adjourn at the sound of the gavel and reconvene at 8:30 tomorrow morning, at which point I will convene the meeting as
Chair Farr?
Yes, Diana.
If I can interrupt, sorry, just on a technical item, it is not a Board of Commissioners meeting, so you will be adjourning this Board of Commissioners, not recessing.
And we'll adjourn today then, and we will join together, not in a public meeting, but in a work session.
Correct. It is a public
tomorrow.
meeting, but it is not a public meeting of the Board of Commissioners. Thanks.
Then my question, and anybody who has the answer to this, when we begin, does the chair start the meeting as with a regular public meeting? Or do we just gather around and say, hey, howdy, how you doing?
It's a work session, so it's a very informal meeting. You can just start the meeting. It will be recorded and webcast.
Very good. Okay, that gives me clarity. Then with no further business for today's meeting, we are adjourned. Thank you.